Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have Jeff Siegler with me from Revitalize or Die. Jeff, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.
So tell me about your background.
I grew up in somewhat of a struggling Rust Belt town in Northwest Ohio, and went to school in studied economics management and economics in college. Sort of got turned on to this idea of community and place and planning. And kind of in between undergrad and graduate school, when I lived out west, I lived in Montana for a bit in a smaller town, and then ended up moving to Brooklyn, and kind of had this epiphany that there was a sense of community in both places, which I didn't expect to have happen. I just assumed that that idea of a sense of community was maybe it was just a big city thing, or maybe it was a small town thing, but to happen in these two completely different places really intrigued me. So started studying planning. I got my degree, worked in real estate development at that time, which again was really enlightening to see how much, just in repairing buildings, how much you could repair a neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
And became fascinated by that. I worked 2 years as a Main Street manager in Ohio, ran the Ohio Main Street program for 10 years. And then I've been doing consulting since about 2017. And really focused around this idea of what hit me in my work, that sometimes we struggle to help communities, was that we were always kind of taking this technical approach. And I realized that the work was a lot more emotional, that a lot of these communities were suffering from apathy. And that takes a different set of, once you finally ask the right questions, you can get some better answers. And
right.
So that work has been fortunately taking me around the country and couple times out of the country, and I get to work with people that are passionate about their town and trying to figure out how to improve things.
Yes. Yeah. That I started seeing your Facebook post, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago. And I think you usually post like your blog posts, but they're very compelling. So that's what got me following you. And so I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation today. And maybe you've already answered this, but what drew you into like the preservation, community development side of preservation?
I think it was in that spell working for a tax credit developer down in Virginia that I saw where that people would really change. That people would change when the building started to improve. That what has dawned on me, and it's only been solidified over and over again throughout the years, is that we are really creatures of our surroundings. And so rundown surroundings tend to lead people to feel run down, and we make rundown decisions. And that's just it can be a ugly cycle. But on the other hand, when people live amongst attractive buildings and pretty places and nice streets, they feel better. They feel better. They make better decisions. They're going to be kinder, nicer, and we've tried every which way to figure out how to improve communities, except the the most simple one, which is make everything nicer, and turns
Right.
out it's nicer.
Yeah, may improve the development or the environment, which really makes sense, because if you think about, even our houses, if we're not if we have a lot of clutter, which I probably shouldn't say that because I'd have to make public confessions, but my office is piles. But you do feel better when things are straightened up and so that I can see that it makes total sense to me that that extends to then our built environment and outside of our houses.
Right. And
Yeah.
we really obsess about the interior of our homes as a nation and kind of ignore the exterior.
Right.
Right. It's these home renovation shows and how many magazines and the interiors and those are all important. But we're more conscientious too. It's like, well, I want to design my bedroom to feel this way, and I'd like to design my
Mhm.
kitchen to feel this way. And let's have a relaxing, calm space. And we are very intentional about making those decisions because we know that that's going to affect how we use that room and enjoy it. And then we walk outside of our four walls. It's like, who cares? Nothing matters. And
Yeah.
that's unfortunate. And I think it's had some really damaging effects on a lot of places.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, so tell me about Revitalize or Die.
So it's just kind of an in-your-face name for my consulting firm, but I knew I needed, if I was going to go out on my own, I needed to try to grab a little bit of attention. So, but what I work with communities around the country that in essence have come to these same sort of conclusions that frustrated that economic development isn't really working or that tourism hasn't helped them, and that these same methods of trying to improve communities for 40 years, like some people see that it's not really working. And so that's where I come in. It's trying to help them, passionate people that want to that are involved in their communities, give them better advice, if you will, that explain that, hey, what we need to be doing is like, it's an emotional problem.
Mhm.
And we keep treating it like a technical one, but it's emotional because humans are
Right.
involved. At the center of what we're doing is we're trying to what we should be aspiring to do is try to make the people that live in a town happy and make their lives better. And it's crazy how often that's dismissed, how that's not even considered, and we've kind of grown to we could think finance is the answer for everything, and it really flies in the face of human nature because people make value decisions and not just
Right.
cost decisions.
Yeah.
And so I try to help communities, figure some of those things out.
So I mean, if you were gonna classify your work, would you say it's more like community redevelopment? Is that what you would rather than
That's
like economic development?
yes, I would say that is
Mm-hmm.
the best description, but it's a bit nebulous. It's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
economic development. I suppose it's community development. Sometimes I say I'm a civic pride consultant. It's not really planning because I don't not I'm a planner by background, but that's not necessarily what I think is the best answer for some of these towns.
Right.
So well, yeah, we'll go with community development.
So tell me about what services you offer.
I do a fair amount of public speaking on these issues. I've been done some civic pride workshops. I'm working with a couple communities right now, doing these year-long civic pride campaigns. Fortunate the last few months have done quite a few of these. A 3-day assessment, come to the community, tour around, meet with all the different stakeholders, and present back, some of my recommendations for what I think they could do better.
Okay. Okay. Very good. And is that um like the downtown playbook, or is that something different?
That is something I'm working with a colleague out of Philadelphia on, Justin Meyer, doing that. And what we're the idea is behind the downtown playbook is to make it extremely easy to go from, hey, I like my community, to here's how I can make an improvement. Because I think that I've noticed that a lot, that let's say you want to get involved in your community, there's not really a clear path. It's
Right.
not always obvious. And those of us that are in it sometimes think, oh yeah, of course, just reach out to me. And it's not, most people are like, well, I don't know who to talk to. I might get told no. Or if I do find the right person to talk to, they're going to tell me that I should probably join a committee and listen to, and go to boring meetings. And
Yeah.
we've put up all these barriers, but most people are inclined. Most people are community concerned and would like to be involved, but they just don't know how. And so, eventually the downtown playbook will be app based, but currently it's web based.
Okay.
And how it works is, a group of people started up in a community, but the idea is to invite everybody.
Okay.
Like it's not sorry, not everybody, people that are positive,
Right.
people that
Yeah.
get it. And so let's say that you have 50 people in the community or 100 people that are all kind of using this dashboard simultaneously. It gives them permission. It's like, hey, I want to do an event. I like Saturday, let's do a cleanup. And that's all you need. Like,
Right.
okay, great. Here's a bunch of people that are like-minded. And so if you just post that Saturday, I want to do a cleanup, excellent. Everybody can come out. Or if you're just like, hey, Sunday afternoon, let's roll our grills into the front yard. And we're kind of thinking about it too, is how to gamify it. Apps are good at that. And it's like, well, let's count how many volunteer hours every month you get towards building local ownership. There's 4 main areas. So one is local ownership. 2 is fun. Like, it's crazy, but this idea of fun really matters, and we should enjoy our communities. The 3rd area is cute, just aesthetics. Anytime you plant flowers, anytime you're scraping paint, like, you are making the town better. It doesn't matter where you started. It doesn't matter where you're trying to go. The process of improvement still means improvement. So it's cute, it's fun, it's local. And attitude is the 4th area.
Yeah.
How do we help improve that civic self-esteem? How do we, maybe it's better photos, maybe it's an occasional article or story, or working with the community that's been doing story night at a local coffee shop. So just like, hey, let's give people some easy tools to make things better, because once momentum builds, it starts to get, it gets carried away. Things get a lot better, but it's really hard to know where to get started.
It is. And I think that that's really insightful that you were talking about giving permission, because I think a lot of people want to get involved, but they are waiting for somebody to tell them that they're allowed to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They don't know. And like, can I do that thing? And 99 times out of 100, whatever that thing is fine.
Right.
It's not going to be bad.
Yeah.
Because people are generally good. So it's giving them permission, and it's giving them a safe space to be positive. Because when a community isn't healthy, and I see this a lot, the negative people start to dominate the narrative, and everybody shies away. They stay away because they don't want to get yelled at. They don't want to be, degraded. And it's like, well, we've got to flip that.
Yeah, definitely. My husband's so Lancaster, where we live, has been pretty well revitalized downtown. I think we're tipping towards gentrification, but 30 years ago downtown was very depressed. But my husband's grandmother always complains still about everything that she doesn't like about what's going on, because it's changing. So I could see how those negative voices can start to drown out what the good that is happening.
Right.
Yeah. So tell me about your book, Your City is Sick.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've realized through this work is how much our places have an impact on our health. And so a lot of people are living in places that make them sick, in essence, that, make their lives worse. That, if you are confined to, if you require a car for survival,
right,
that's no good. It's not a knock against car ownership. It's an absolute indictment of building places that require car ownership to survive. And so what we know about, if you live in one of those places, you're probably going to have, you're going to have more physical health issues. We know that you're probably going to eat worse because it's going to be more fast food. There's a lot of stress from being in the car. You're going to have a harder time making friends because, you're more isolated.
Mm-hmm.
There's less of those common spaces. But it's the same with, a town that's run down, a town where the buildings are falling down. Like, that's going to have significant mental health issues. You're going to, all of us have looked at a certain part of town and been like, oh, I bet you, addicts and criminals live there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because what we're seeing is that degraded surroundings are probably places where that happens. And that's not, and I think it's okay for us to say that. We try to shy away from that. Like, oh, we're leaping to conclusions. Like, no, we're not. We can be fairly sure that crime more often takes place. There's certain environments that seem more welcoming to crime. I had this conversation with the community I was working with in Kentucky that was sort of fascinating, but they're struggling with some vagrancy issues, and they were like starting to seed ground you know, and it's like, well, let's close that park. And it's like, well, you realize the more lights you turn off and the more, you know, what welcomes one type of person, you know, with sort of more positive social behavior is well lit, pretty nice places with a lot of other people.
Yeah.
But if you're sort of involved in antisocial behavior, you know, maybe drug use or crime, you're kind of looking for the exact opposite type of space.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a fascinating thing to consider. But like you don't want well lit, you know, public, crowded places. So, so yeah, it's a lot about that. It's a lot about how our environment really has, you know, we treat, I mean, what is it? I think it's something like 18% of our GDP now goes to healthcare, and we're treating one person at a time, which is not the most efficient way. And, you know, as the built environment improves, you can improve thousands and, you know, tens of thousands of people's lives at a time. We need to think more about how the built environment's affecting the health of the people that call places home.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And it's looking at it as more of not just like one issue, but a societal issue. And so I think that's a good, it's something to consider that I don't think a lot of people think about.
Right. It is extremely overlooked, and it's actually a really simple solution. It's not one that's considered. I had an interesting experience. It was my first. I had been a few years since I've been in New York City, and I was there over the weekend, and it was friendlier than ever.
Oh.
Like, it was friendlier than ever. I don't recall, you know, like I said, I lived there years ago, and I don't recall it being that friendly of a place at the time. You recall people being a little harsher, and boy, if not every interaction was just positive. And it's like, oh, but there's a city that continues to improve, you know, more bike lanes and more better public space and you know, more attractive, and just more just being more cognizant of the, you know, public realm. And I mean, you know, I can't say with any certainty, but it sure seems that people have gotten friendlier there in recent years, and you have to assume that there's some sort of connection.
Right. And that makes sense to me. So what challenges or trends do you see within your corner of preservation?
You know, it's still I see more and more communities starting to understand that, hey, like we have to go beyond talking numbers. That finance isn't going to be the only solution. And, you know, when I see communities that are starting to have the sort of current generation of elected officials, I think they're a little more aware in making some of those decisions that, you know, just it's finance first thinking. It's been 40 years of not really giving us any solutions.
Right.
And so we have to rethink that. And I'm seeing that happen. You know, it reminds me of a community visit I was on last year that, you know, survey came back in, and it was, you know, what's your favorite aspect, or what's your favorite part of town?
Yeah.
In this particular town, everybody said the county courthouse. And I'm like, right, that makes sense. But they would never build that today.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that would be seen as so frivolous. It's such a waste of money. And like, how backwards is that? Here's this thing that you idealize. Here's this thing that you put on every logo that you hold up as being the best of us. But then you know, to do that today would be frivolous, and that thinking has to change.
Right. I agree with you. I actually was just talking to somebody else about that. We, not this past weekend, the weekend before, went on a tour of the Harrisburg State Hospital before the state is going to adaptively reuse like 4 of the buildings. And I was standing there thinking, these buildings were built about 100 years ago, and they are so ornate and they are so detailed. And yeah, we're not building like that anymore. Yeah.
Right. We don't. And you know, a beautiful county courthouse has paid for itself how many hundreds of times over.
Yeah.
Right. By the increased real estate values and taxes. So we really have to get back to beauty. And you know, one of the things that this might be, you know, I think sometimes that I wish preservation organizations at times would think more also about aesthetics as a whole. That, you know, preservation matters, but also just beauty in general.
Right.
because nobody's really in charge of that. And I think preservation organizations are best positioned to consider that kind of stuff. It's like, hey, it old matters. Certainly, we
Right.
should preserve what we can, but also we should really push to make sure that new things are nice. They
Right.
like those two. The two concepts seems like they would mesh very well, and sometimes I think preservation organizations can get some. I mean, I've certainly seen where they can get in their own way. Um, but I think I think it would be useful more often if that the idea of just, I mean, I remember being on a board for a preservation organization years ago, and it came up to replacing a sign in front of one of our, we had like a house museum, and there was a really close vote whether the sign up front should be plastic or wood.
Oh,
And it was like, guys, like what? We're supposed to be, we should be
right. You should be setting the example. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Right. We should be advocating for great design. Sure, it's a little bit cheaper, but like it's ugly. You can
Right.
tell that it's fake. And boy, it really surprised me.
Yeah. Yeah. That would surprise me also. But yeah, people still make decisions. You're talking about values. I think that sometimes even people within preservation don't share the same values. So that.
Right. And and I've come to find that, or I've realized that it's not that subjective either, that beauty and quality aesthetics are not that subjective.
Right.
And I think we've done ourselves a disservice in arguing that it's subjective, that it's in the eye of the beholder, because then, anybody can come along and say, well, no, I like that.
Right. Yeah.
This one-story vinyl building is good enough. And it's like, no, it
Right.
really isn't. And we should ask for better. Like it's universal what people, what people are drawn to.
Yeah.
We can see it that, these traditional main streets are always the part of town where people, have these emotional experiences, or I lost my train of thought of it, but I do think that we're better off to say that this stuff is a lot less subjective than we think, and that good design is pretty inherent.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And there's a reason that the traditional designs have been, similar in like the basics, not necessarily the decorations, for hundreds of years, because
Right.
they were universally, accepted and appreciated.
Right. When you have quality materials, craftsmanship, and patience, and this, that's the case for buildings, absolutely, right. But it's the case for anything. It's the case for any craft. If somebody learns their trade and takes some time and uses good materials, like you can't miss. And we've tried to rush it. I compare it to the food movement. Like you can't. Fast food will never be quality.
Right.
But fast places can't be of any quality either. They're going to make us sick.
Yeah, that's very true. We John Leake, who's in Maine, he's Historic House Works. We went to a presentation that he did maybe more than almost 20 years ago now, probably. And he was talking about, the change in construction from World War II on, and how it pretty much just made product installers. And since I learned that, it changed the way I thought about modern construction. So
yeah, there's not much to feel passionate about. There's not much to get excited about. There's not much to get emotionally attached to, and that's terrible.
Yeah.
And I've started to use some of that language too. I had somebody ask me recently, like, what's your impression of our town? And I said, honestly, it's hard to love.
Yeah.
And that's sort of shifting. It's putting the focus on this as an emotional thing. Like your town shouldn't be hard to love.
Right.
Why don't you make it easy to love? Stop. There's a lot of hand wringing, like people here these days, like kids don't care, kids don't matter. Like, no, you've built a bunch of garbage, and
and the kids didn't have a say in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If they're all leaving to go somewhere else, like it's on you.
Yeah. Very, very true. Is there anything that, as we're getting ready to wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to share that you thought of while we were talking?
No, just that what I guess what I would ask anybody to do is be more conscientious of how space affects you. Yeah. I mean, it's really a fascinating experience to check in emotionally Whether it's, we've all had the experience of walking into a cathedral or a beautiful hotel lobby, and all of a sudden we feel different.
Right.
I mean, and that's the key thing. It's not just, oh, hey, I'm looking at something neat. Like literally you're feeling different. And
Yeah.
boy, I mean, we had so many experiences like that this past weekend in New York. It's like, oh wow, God, there's so many incredible interiors that just make you feel amazing. And start to pay attention to that, to how you feel in space. But also when you're walking down the street, when you're walking down the street, think about, hey, do I feel agitated? Do I feel calm? Do I feel nervous? Do I feel sophisticated?
Right.
Because those things are all occurring. And if you pay a little attention, you'll start to better understand how space affects us and why it matters, because we need to pay a lot more attention to the environments we're building, and whether they're, are they creating good outcomes or bad outcomes? And all too often it's not good.
Yeah. I think that that's a really good, and it's good for people who are involved in planning and community redevelopment to, understand that too, because I think a lot of times, they're just, using, are there any open storefronts, or, those kinds of metrics. And I think that the feeling and that emotional, because if people believe in it, they're gonna want to, if they feel an emotional connection, they're going to want to make sure that it continues to improve rather than not having that emotional connection. So I think that's a really good idea for people. Is anything that you would like to promote to our listeners?
But yeah, if you want to get in touch, if there's any interest in my work, really easy to find at revitalizeordie.com. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn, usually post something once a day. So feel free to check anything out there. And certainly, if you feel like reading an interesting book on this subject, Your City is Sick is available at the website.
Okay, very good. I'll make sure that all of those links are on our website where the podcast lives. So if somebody's listening and they didn't get a chance to write that down, they can definitely go there and click straight through to you.
Wonderful.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.